The keys.
Good afternoon. I call to order the December 25 meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee of the University of Minnesota. Thank you for all of you gathered here in the room. Thank you those who are joining us on live stream and also via Zoom today. I want to welcome our student representatives today, Caleb Massey from the Twin Cities campus. Thank you, Caleb, for being here. And also Simon Reno from the Duluth campus. And sadly, this is Simon's last meeting with us as he's graduating from UMD. Just really appreciate, Simon, your participation as a student representative. Thank you. And we know, we don't have to wish you well because we know you're just going to do well. So there's that. So with that, we'll go ahead and start with our first agenda item today, which is the 2027 budget variables and levers for a discussion. And we want to make sure that we welcome Vice President and Budget Director Julie Tonneson, more to say on that one, and Assistant Budget Director Corin Zeewertz to the presenters table. They're already there. Before we start this item, I just want to acknowledge that after more than 30 years, today's presentation will be the final for Vice President Julie Tonneson. The board will formally recognize Vice President Tonneson tomorrow at the board meeting. That said, I just want to let you know the deep appreciation all of us have for you, for your commitment to the university's mission and to this work of this committee. Your presentations on the operating budget and how they have built have been really taken a highly complex topic and distilled it down to a way that we all understood it and brought forward key governance issues and choices that we needed to make. So appreciate that. Also want to thank you for your partnership on able to design a budget process, development process, which this agenda item is part of, and that engages the board in each step of the way to ensure our impact and input is reflected and heard before the final budget arrives in June. I will say, too, personally, the first time I ever saw Vice President Tonneson was when she was testifying in front of a committee at the House building, and there wasn't one question. It got testy maybe even sometimes. There wasn't one question she could not answer with specific information, just to like an encyclopedia. We'll miss your presentations, your warmth, your humor, and we certainly wish you the best in your retirement. So thank you for all you've given. With that, I will turn somewhat emotionally to Executive Vice President Goldman.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair Wheeler, members of the committee. Today marks the formal kickoff of our development process for the fiscal year 27 annual operating budget. This conversation begins the structured sequence of work that will carry us through a review in February of the budget framework variables specific to FY27 and culminate in your consideration of the President's recommended annual operating budget in June of 2026. As you'll recall, in October, we outlined the university's overall budget model to ground those upcoming discussions in a shared understanding of how our resources are generated, allocated, and managed. Building on that foundation, today's presentation will take a high-level look at the major categories and trends shaping our revenues and expenditures. Our goal this afternoon is to orient the committee to the broad fiscal landscape heading into FY27 and to gather your early guidance on priorities and expectations. Your input at this stage is essential as we shape a budget that reflects the university's mission, strategic direction, and commitment to long-term financial strength. But before we move to the substance of the presentation, I, too, want to dive into the Thank You Fest for Julie and recognize what she's been able to accomplish before she retires at the end of January, early February. Since starting in 1993, Julie has provided thoughtful, steady, and visionary leadership in managing the university's financial strategies. She has served as a direct financial advisor to 5 presidents, senior leaders, and many regents, guiding critical discussions that have ensured both our financial stability and the advancement of our land-grant mission. Her expertise has been central to creating and communicating our biannual budget requests to the state and overseeing the financial planning for more than 50 academic and administrative units. Julie's knowledge, integrity, and dedication have left an enduring legacy at the University of Minnesota. I thank Julie for her extraordinary contributions and wish her all the best in a well-deserved and well-earned retirement. I am personally grateful for her expert counsel and extraordinary work during my first year here at the University of Minnesota. So my thanks, Julie, as well. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our Vice President, Julie Tonneson, and Assistant Budget Director, Corinne Zewers, thank you, Corinne, to do the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, and just let me say very quickly, thank you, EVP Goldman, Chair Wheeler, members. It has been a privilege and an honor to work with you, so I really appreciate it. I can't believe it is my last presentation before you, but here we are. So let me begin by summarizing when our various planned discussions on the budget occur throughout this year. In October, we discussed a general overview of the budget model, as EVP Goldman said, that helps us translate the financial challenges and opportunities for the university down to our various budgeting units. And then we also presented an overview of the annual budget process that results in our delivery of the President's recommended budget to you in the spring. That process is well underway for FY27, so this month, our focus with the board is on an overview of the primary revenue and expenditure variables that drive the budget each year. We will discuss trends and the current status of those variables to provide you with background information on the budget overall. At the February board meeting, you will discuss more refined FY27 specific estimates for the different revenue and expense variables that will need to be addressed next year. It will be an opportunity for further discussion after you've had some time to think about what we are reviewing today. And finally, President Cunningham will deliver her recommended FY27 operating budget for your review and action in June. Very briefly, I'd like to remind everyone that when we talk about the budget with you, we distinguish between what we call the primary discretionary funds in the budget framework, namely the unrestricted O&M appropriation and tuition versus all other revenues. Most plans for tuition and the O&M appropriation are shaped at the high institutional level. Many of the enrollment strategies, as well as the recommended tuition rates for the majority of our students, are developed centrally. Additionally, it is university leadership that develops the recommended request to the state of Minnesota for additional appropriations. Growth in these particular funds is necessary to support literally every aspect of our mission, direct programming as well as the associated overhead. Combined, they represent roughly 38% of our annual revenues, but more importantly, because they are unrestricted and can be directed at the institutional level, they punch above their weight, so to speak, allowing us to address anything that needs attention. All other revenues, which we will touch on more later in the presentation today, are from all other sources, some unrestricted at the unit level and many restricted to particular uses. The full recommended budget you will receive in June incorporates all of these revenues and their corresponding estimated expenditures. It will be an all-funds budget. However, much of our conversation with you focuses on the state appropriation and tuition portion of this picture because of the decisions that are necessary at the institutional level to complete the budget. We'll draw attention to those decision points today as we walk through the variables. Turning now to the variables and the levers, I'm first going to address the spending categories and trends that will drive some of our decisions, with some early level cost estimates to introduce the magnitude of what we could be looking at for next year. First, some history. This chart shows total expenditures from 2015 to 2025 adjusted for inflation. The maroon bars show total expenditures for all non-sponsored funds combined, adjusted to 2015 dollars, and the gold bars reflect the same thing for just the state and tuition funds portion of those totals. From this view of total expenditures, there are a couple of interesting messages, I think. First, for all funds combined, our spending has grown over the prior year every year but 3. You see the largest drop in FY21 thanks to reduced activities associated with the pandemic. And that actually is the only year where the unadjusted actual expenditures actually decreased from the prior year. The total growth in this bar over the 10 years is 8.1%, but that growth has been at an average annual rate of only 0.9%, even while our scope and activity levels increased during this time. And second, our spending of state and tuition dollars has actually decreased over the 10 years when adjusted for inflation, in total by 2.2%, and at an rate annualized over the 10 years of 0.2%, which is evidence of increased reliance on other revenues and spending controls. Every year, we must address cost increases, and we've done so in part through our internal process to force reprioritization of existing resources, which helps pull down the annual change in expenditures from what they otherwise would be. That internal process is an important part of our budget balancing efforts. It forces conversations and decisions related to the type of actions that are highlighted here on this next slide. Each year, we ask our units to make decisions to use these tools to free up existing resources. They have had to search for opportunities to do more or the same level of activity at less cost. And in some years, including the current year, we have made decisions to actually reduce scope across many units. The tools highlighted here are used each year in different formats and in different magnitudes across all our units as they search for the most advantageous way to pull costs out of their budgets. So turning now to the most pertinent cost variables for FY27 budget planning, we will talk through our major categories of growing costs, including compensation, always a top budget item to address, repair of our facilities, utilities, and maintenance of our technology infrastructure. Plus, we will touch on some areas of planned investment in next year's budget, primarily related to our workforce and implementation of the Elevate Extraordinary 2030 plan. So starting with compensation. As this table shows, from 2015 to 2020, the university implemented general salary pool increases at roughly the rate of inflation or slightly above. And then we came to FY21 and FY22, in which we froze all but bargaining unit salaries one year and implemented a small across-the-board increase the next year, both in response to the budgetary impacts of COVID-19. Those modest increases allowed us to keep up with recruitment and retention needs for many of our job categories, but not all. Then, with the onset of pandemic recovery in the economy, significant increases in inflation, and a decrease in the number of people seeking employment, the labor markets and our own goals to attract and retain talent required us to implement significantly higher salary pool increases across the last 4 years. While these increases have contributed greatly to rewarding our employees, we are still left with a very challenging compensation landscape. There are no signs right now that lead us to believe a return to the 2 to 2.5% range of increase will be acceptable. In fact, in its most recent forecast, the state of Minnesota estimated average annual increases in wages within Minnesota of 3.5 to 4% per year in the 2027 to 29 timeframe. The decision to increase that overall salary pool and at what specific percent is largely based on 3 considerations. First, what is happening inside the organizations with which we compete for talent? Second, what is happening with the cost of living for our employees? And finally, we must consider what is happening to other costs within the university and the revenue sources available to pay the increases. Costs are high and unrestricted revenue growth is constrained. In the end, it is a balancing act between these different forces that leads us to a decision on what to include in the budget. For magnitude, implementing salary pool increases like those of the last 2 years would mean cost increases of roughly $55 to $60 million for state and tuition-funded positions in the next year, and an equal amount for positions funded from all other sources. And this is on top of projected increases in the medical components of our fringe benefit programs. As we are a people place, this category of spending will continue to be the largest budget challenge for next year. And beyond the general increase in our contractual pay obligations, the merit pool, and fringe benefit costs, there are wage pressures in a number of areas that will impact budget plans in the next few years. The combined general pressures of negotiating and implementing new labor contracts, external markets in competing for talent, and internal equity considerations across units and activities will drive costs. In addition, the University Senate passed a resolution in support of significant changes in pay and working conditions for all employees, and we'll need to address the growing costs of health benefits for our employees. Investments in these items could easily be in the millions. Compensation is big, compensation is important, but we cannot forget that all of our people work in and around facilities, and they need the proverbial stuff to deliver on what is expected of them. The four most significant FY27 variables outside of compensation are included in this table. For facilities, we will need to decide whether to add to the recurring dollars in the budget for regular renovation and repair projects. In addition, you will recall that we started funding the cost of the new capital investment initiative this year through carving out $10 million for the necessary debt service over this year and next for that program. But as it continues, an incremental $10 million will need to be incorporated into the spending plan for each biennium, and you may want to spread that out over each year rather than in 2-year increments. In addition, the other two drivers you see listed here for facilities will present unavoidable cost increases. Each time a new or significantly renovated building opens up, it comes with required operating costs. And utilities are projected to increase significantly again next year, largely driven by natural gas price increases, which directly affects our steam, electricity, and chilled water production, and cash flow fluctuations resulting from the impact weather has on meeting utility budgets each year. Generally, annual facility-related cost increases have been in the $5 to $7 million range, but for the next year, we are expecting higher numbers. A similar situation exists for technology. Negotiated vendor contracts alone often require an annual increase of roughly $2 million. The $5 to $10 million estimate shown here incorporates potential technology maintenance and security enhancements, items that are increasingly required. In addition, we've been implementing a number of changes to enhance safety and security on our campuses, and we are aware of a broad set of needs that fall into the overall compliance category of spending, which often overlaps with safety. We recently concluded the budget review process with our support units, and from that, we will develop a better sense of which specific items might fall in the must-do category. And then we'll add to that list as we review the budget needs of our academic units in the coming months. I would expect the total cost here to be several $1 million as well. And finally, the ability to enhance our programming and move forward with initiatives designed to achieve the goals of the strategic roadmap will require investment. We strive every year to attract the best and the brightest, to provide top-of-the-line services for our students, to excel in research, and to make meaningful contributions to our communities and the state. This work simply must move forward. Specific costs associated with these activities will be further developed over the coming months. We bring it to your attention now because we will likely discuss investment in these areas as part of the President's recommended budget. Moving now to the resource variables in our budget framework, I will turn the presentation over to Assistant Budget Director Zuers.
Thank you, Vice President Tonneson. Chair Wheeler and committee members, thank you again for having us here today. I will now move on to the resource variables considered in the budget framework, as Vice President Tonneson just said. These are the state appropriations, tuition, savings from our internal reallocations, and other revenues that we can bring to the table. First, I would like to begin with a high-level summary of our revenues and how they have changed over the last several decades. This bar chart uses 6-year increments highlighting changes in tuition, state appropriations, and other revenues from 1990 to today. This revenue mix is an important factor during our budgeting process, given restrictions associated with each source. As we discussed with you in October, our state appropriations and tuition revenue are our most flexible sources. As our revenue mix has changed over time, the complexity of our budgeting has changed as well. Back in 1990, the state appropriations represented 39% of our revenue. By 2008, this dropped to 27% and then dropped another 12 percentage points from 2008 to today. In fiscal year 26, state appropriations represent 15% of our revenue. From the 1990s through the mid-2000s, the change in state appropriations was primarily made up with growth in tuition revenue. Tuition revenue grew from 12% of total revenue in 1990 to 22% in 2008. Today, tuition revenue represents 23% of our revenue. From 2008 to today, the greatest revenue growth has been in our other revenues. Growth in sponsored grants, indirect cost recovery, auxiliary income, sales, and so forth have outpaced the growth in state appropriations and tuition. These other sources can sometimes be used to help balance our budget, but oftentimes they come with additional restrictions, increased operating costs, or other factors. It is with this context in mind that I will spend the next few minutes walking through the state appropriations, tuition, and other revenues in greater detail. First, we'll start with our state appropriations, which are anticipated to total $762 million in fiscal year 27. The appropriations include our overall operations and maintenance appropriation, other general fund appropriations, and state specials, as well as our funding from the cigarette tax and healthcare access fund. These revenues are considered in our budget framework. I should note non-recurring appropriations are not included here, as they are typically designated for specific time-limited projects and cannot be used to support general operations. Although our state appropriations have increased over the last 10 years, unadjusted for inflation, this growth has occurred inconsistently. Our state appropriation was approximately $670 million in fiscal year 2018 and has grown by approximately $90 million since that time. Much of this growth occurred in 3 specific years, fiscal year 2020, 2022, and 2024. For the fiscal year 27 budgeting process, our current law operating appropriations are flat, and we anticipate no changes will be enacted during the 2026 legislative session. This will limit our ability to use state funds to cover the cost increases Vice President Tonneson mentioned during the first portion of the presentation. Next, we'll move on to tuition. This year's tuition revenue is forecasted at roughly $1.1 billion. You can see here the projected tuition revenue by student level, with the highest percentage generated from Twin Cities resident and reciprocity undergraduate students at 39%. This is followed by Twin Cities graduate students at 20% and so on. The amount of tuition revenue generated is impacted by a variety of factors such as tuition rates, student enrollment, course registrations, and credits per student, as well as the mix of students, resident, non-resident, undergraduate, graduate, and so on. As each of these factors shifts, the revenue also shifts. This can lead to tuition revenue coming in differently than we originally budgeted, especially at the unit level. Although this forecasting process is complicated, in most years our actual revenue is within 1% of the original budget. Some years we have a slightly positive variance, and other years a slightly negative variance. For fiscal year 26, current projections should suggest tuition revenue will come in 1.1% above budget across the system. These estimates are based on fall 2025 enrollment and will be updated in late January with the start of the spring semester, and again in late spring during the budget process. This is a positive picture university-wide. At the same time, it is important to mention that there are a few units that are projecting their tuition revenue will come in below budget. For those units, the university's multi-stage tuition estimating process encourages them to identify potential challenges early in the academic year and to make mid-year adjustments in spending whenever possible. Both positive and negative variances are discussed as a part of the operating budget process in the spring. Based on our current revenue estimates and no changes in enrollment, we are projecting each 1% increase in tuition rates across all student levels will yield $11 million in additional new tuition revenue. There are 2 types of considerations that are taken into account as we are building the budget and considering the growth potential for tuition revenue. The first set of considerations are related to changes in the tuition rates. Rate changes have the most direct impact on our tuition revenue. As we are developing the budget, we'll consider rate changes for each student group, taking into account student demand, peer comparisons, other labor market conditions, the real costs faced by the institution, the availability of other resources, students' ability to pay, and the corresponding availability of financial aid. The tuition rate chosen for each student group is a conscious decision each year. Enrollment changes are also considered. Enrollment considerations focus both on the retention of current students as well as recruiting new students, and each campus focuses on different aspects of enrollment given a broad range of factors. Current enrollment, student mix, economic and demographic factors, other market conditions, and so forth are all considered. The Twin Cities campus, as an example, is looking at potential room for growth in its non-resident, non-reciprocity student enrollment. Rochester has a long-term plan for campus growth, and our other greater Minnesota campuses are focused on stabilizing their enrollments and moving towards future growth in enrollment. The third resource variable I wanted to touch on today is our use of reallocations to help balance the budget. Reallocation is a budgeting term we use when units reduce expenses through either efficiency gains or scope reductions in order to repurpose those existing resources for reinvestment elsewhere. They're an important part of our budgeting process. We have relied on reallocations to varying degrees over the last 10 years, as you can see here, and have relied on them more heavily as we have worked to limit tuition increases without increases in our state appropriations. Although units are usually given consistent reallocation planning targets each year, we look at each unit's individual circumstances and their reallocation proposals before determining their final reductions. This fall, many support units received reallocation targets of 1%, 3%, and 5%, and their proposed actions in response to those targets will help provide options to fund the costs in the budget framework. A similar process will be used during the academic process. Back on the first bar chart I showed, I also mentioned other revenues and how we have become more reliant on our funding outside of the state appropriations and tuition dollars. Here's a list of those other resources. Those noted with an R are restricted and can only be used for specific purposes. In contrast, some of the other revenues, such as indirect cost recovery revenue, are less restricted. For the current year, we have budgeted roughly $2.9 billion in other revenues. As we are thinking through balancing the operating budget, these other revenues are a part of the discussion. It is expected that units are actively managing these funds and will work to ensure the revenues are growing to cover the associated cost increases. Sometimes units may use the more flexible sources to help cover costs previously paid for with operations and maintenance and tuition funds. At the same time, there are also times when units cannot grow these other revenues to cover their current costs. So they are expected to reduce expenses on these other funds as well. Essentially, additional reallocations related to these revenue sources. These sources do pose several challenges for budget management. Many are restricted, as I mentioned earlier, for specific use, or they come with increased infrastructure or support costs. In addition, not all units have the ability to generate these revenues at the same level, and the revenues may be non-recurring, all of which adds to the complexity when they are used to help balance the less restricted state and tuition funds. I will close my comments today by introducing several key topics in anticipation of our conversation during the February meeting. Several discussion prompts are listed here related to both resources and costs. We will need to address these topics over the next several months before we present the President's proposed operating budget in June. We're happy to begin the conversation today or take any questions you may have on the budget levers and variables. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, I know that we'll continue to build on this process, you know, as we go forward. And next step is comes in February, as you stated. So we'll look forward to that and building out the best budget possible as it comes to time for the president's recommendation in June. So thank you very much. And Julie, thank you. Yeah. All right. Going to move on to the second part of our agenda now, which is an update on the Minnesota Innovation Exchange, otherwise known as the MIX. Joining Executive Vice President Goldman to provide an update is University of Minnesota Foundation President and CEO John Morris. Executive Vice President Goldman, would you like to start?
Great. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Wheeler and members of the committee. As many of you know, the development project located just east of this building spans more than a decade of planning. Today, that project, led by the foundation, is also known as the MIX. Our goal this afternoon is to provide a clear, factual history on how the project got started, how it has evolved, where things stand today, and our path forward. As John will share in a moment, this project began with the founding of the real estate subsidiary of the foundation with an amazing private student housing gift almost 20 years ago. That gift, as well as the return of football to campus at Huntington Bank Stadium in 2009, created an opportunity for the University and the Foundation to imagine a vibrant Eastern Gateway to campus, a place that could connect research, private sector partners, community amenities, and student and faculty activity. The concept has evolved over time into what we now call the MIX, an innovation district aligned with the national models and fully consistent with our long-term campus vision. I want to acknowledge the strong partnership and alignment with the University of Minnesota Foundation, their board of directors, and John Morris, who's been an exceptional collaborator, disciplined, transparent, and 100% aligned with our institutional priorities. In short, today's update is about clarity, context, and looking forward, definitive plan and timeline. John will walk through the history, the current state, and the steps ahead, and we look forward to your questions. With that, I turn it over to John.
Thank you. Chair Wheeler, President Cunningham, and members of the Board of Regents, I'm John Morris, and pleased to be invited by EVP Goldman to provide you with this update on the UMF subsidiaries, specifically the MIX project. While Greg and I represent only 6 months in a year of the work being done, it embodies the work of our predecessors and yours, with the vision of creating a welcoming entrance to the eastern edge of campus. And the imperative became urgent with the development of the Biomedical Discovery District and the return of football in 2009. I'll finish today with an update on the current status of this plan and what we're doing to ensure we are as nimble as possible to the marketplace while honoring the vision of a welcoming eastern edge of campus. For our agenda today, we'll review a bit of history before updating you on the progress of the project that started out called East Gateway and now today is known as the Minnesota Innovation Exchange, the MIX. Let's see. The University Foundation is an independent, operational 501c3 charity formed in 1962 with the sole obligation to benefit the University of Minnesota. Our primary work is philanthropy through the solicitation and stewardship of private gifts to fuel the university's mission. And as I shared with this board at our annual update in October, donors committed a record $464 million in gifts and commitments last fiscal year and provided over $300 million of direct support for students, faculty, research, and capital projects, all in accordance with donor intent. Our first subsidiary, UMFIA, was created nearly 20 years ago when the endowment had grown over $500 million, and the investment advisory subsidiary was formed to professionalize the management of the endowment. And we're here today to speak directly of the second subsidiary, UMF-REA. I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to be very specific about the objectives of the University of Minnesota Foundation. It is our ambition to be the most exceptional foundation for our donors, for our team, and for our university. We believe in Minnesota, and we believe it deserves our very best. Everything we do must serve to benefit the university and align with our donors' intent. So let me tell you a story of that donor intent. It came from, in 2007, with a gift from the Cargill estate. We accepted a gift valued at over $38 million in private real estate. The foundation took full operating ownership of the 5 Denikin properties in 2012, which resulted in the formation of this subsidiary, UMF-REA. The gift was made with the condition that the property be used in perpetuity to benefit students. As the years progress, the university needed to focus on the biomedical discovery district and other capital assets. UMF-REA began to acquire properties to protect them from the disjointed and unconnected private development that was beginning to creep closer to campus and encroach on the game day experience as well as future campus plans. And as over the last decade and more, sparked by this gift from the Cargill family, the foundations seized the opportunity to protect the eastern edge of campus and the Twin Cities campus for the realization of a larger, not parcel by parcel, vision for the campus surrounding community. This work of preserving the perimeter and visioning what could be came in active partnership with the university and leaders of this board. A better vision for the eastern edge of campus was first articulated in 2009 on the Twin Cities Campus Master Plan, reinforced in 2014 neighborhood engagement plans, in 2016 by the Minneapolis Development Framework, and most recently by the 2021 changes to the Twin Cities Master Plan. Over this same period of time, the competition for public-private confluence was growing strong across the country, and the emergence and excitement around innovation districts became the aspiration of many high-level research universities. The vision became that the East Gateway District could be that location for the university. So we wanted a welcoming place for students, for faculty and staff, and patients in the community, a connection to support the Biomedical Discovery District, game day engagement, on the south side of Washington Avenue. And the vision to build a mixed-use space where talent, innovation, and entrepreneurial needs could all come together. Today, what we've now branded the Mix includes the areas shaded in green on this map. Over the years, UMF-REA has worked to conduct holistic district planning with the university to achieve mission and vision alignment, to stop the piecemeal approach that was encroaching on campus, to activate the private market and the city, while attempting to stay nimble in the plans that we all know in this ever-changing marketplace. Additionally, this planning and acquisition was achieved without the university using its own resources. So that generally wraps up the work that has been done, and now we move to the work that is in front of us today for the next year. The area here shaded in maroon on the corner of Huron and Washington is the planned location for the first building, with the intent of the building to be filled with partners who will help advance the work of the university in a common shared ground level to enhance the experience of our community. Getting to this stage over the last 5 years included many of the milestones you see here, with finalizing the governance agreement between the university and the foundation, completing the mandated environmental reviews, developing the project brand, selecting our private developer partners for the development, the design, and the leasing of this building, and creating a program and render design and securing Building 1 approvals from the city of Minneapolis. The work we will do in partnership with EVP Goldman and the university over the next year, along with our private sector partners, will be the objectives you see here. Complete the IT building relocation by the end of the calendar year of 26, pre-lease targets of the Building 1 at 50%, hold information sessions and community opinion leaders, including the assessment of tax incremental financing available, complete all Block 1 building and demolition land work, and complete Building 1 and Phase 1 public realm design. I'll add that we recognize that market conditions have changed and constantly change, and so simultaneously, we'll create a shared contingency plan for Block 1 and Building 1 over this next year, aligned with our purpose of benefiting the university. It is our intent that by this time next year, when invited to return for this update and to share the progress over the last 12 months, we'll have clear decisions and tangible, achievable next steps on this evolving vision. In summary, the work ahead this year is contained to Block 1 and Building 1. The exciting elements of this entirety of this vision are still very much alive by making the 12 acres east of campus into a special gateway to campus, a collision space for industry and discovery at the university, and a place our students, faculty, alumni, industry partners, and communities can engage in a safe and special place. Thank you, Chair Wheeler and President Cunningham and Regents. And with that, I will turn it back to EVP Goldman for wrap-up remarks and any questions.
Thank you.
So I think John framed it well. I don't have any wrap-up remarks, but certainly John and I are willing to take any questions that board members may have.
Great. Any questions? Regent Bergstrom.
Thank you, Chair Wheeler. Thank you, President Morris, or CEO Morris, Vice President Goldman. A question on the map you showed so briefly. When you refer to the 12 acres, is that the full size of that green shaded area?
Yes.
So that's just the green?
Yeah.
Okay.
Regent Gold. Luger.
It's all right, thank you.
Mixing.
I'll respond to
members.
most any name.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair Wheeler, and thank you, CEO Morris, for that exciting update. I'm just wondering, I know it's early, but have we begun conversations with the private sector? Is there a sense that the private sector is excited about this public-private partnership?
Yeah, so we have engaged conversations in Mortenson in partnership with our leasing partners, and we have interest, but we are working actively on securing that interest to make this project feasible in the marketplace. So a lot has changed, obviously, since 2020, and so we want to take our best chances at seeing is this viable for Building 1.
And do we have, are we looking at particular industries or really being open about what comes in, or?
Yeah, well, it has to fit the filter, right? The filter of enhancing and serving the mission of the university. So those that have close research partnerships or hire our interns or hire our students, those things would be all those filters we want to hit that advance the mission of the university. Yeah.
Terrific. Other comments or questions? Yes.
Thank you,
Regent
Chair
Mohammed.
Wheeler. Just wondering around the longevity of this project and how you're seeing the connectivity to the Tower Side Innovation District, which is right on the gateway of this particular site, and also what is the affordability mix that we're thinking about in accessing this site so folks really be able to have the opportunity to really engage with the resources that are being proposed and really hoped upon in the state?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Pertaining to the Denikin properties, it's the Cargill's intention that that's affordable housing, and we're very proud of offering over 1,000 beds that are affordable housing for our students, and so that's a critical key component. Obviously, this is a vision that has been in the works for 20 years, and I anticipate the vision continues to be working over the next several decades to make the best use of this space to serve the mission of this university over and over again. So I would say I think the plans are nimble to adjust to the marketplace, and we're prepared to partner to serve the university that must make sense.
Great, thank you. And another, I think, important thing to note, going back to the slide that showed the map, it's also in that one there. What's important to note here is wherever this project ends up, securing the land around it, you can see the white space in the middle of the private housing that encroached into the area. You'll hear in the next item about the last little piece of land here that we're able to bring into our planning area. So if nothing else, the foresight, which maybe wasn't the foresight then, but it has become, is that it's protecting the gateway from private development, from private student housing and other things that we can't control. So a real positive for the foundation and the university as well.
That's an excellent point. Thank you. President Cunningham? Chair Hipp, she defers to you.
Chair Wheeler, thank you. Question I have is, okay, so a big project and I love it. Okay, I think I like progress, I guess you could say. But how do you balance when to do this project with macroeconomic trends? Because you're building a 70 to 100-year project here, and there's always going to be ebbs and flows in when is a good time to do it. Like maybe now there's a surplus of commercial real estate. 5 years ago when we started the project, there was a shortage.
Yep.
And so we have to progress, but at the same time, when is a good time to do that, I guess. And maybe it's a like, I'm not asking you to, I mean, more hypothetical than anything maybe, but I just,
I think that's exactly precise. We have to respond to the market, right? And
Yeah.
when the objective of this next year to see is that market timing right for a commercial building on Block 1, Phase 1.
Sounds good.
Thank you. President Cunningham, please.
Yeah, thanks. And first of all, I want to really just commend the partnership between the foundation and EVP Goldman in just thinking and working and, about how the amazing foundation which you're leading, serves the university here in a long-term vision. And so it's been a wonderful collaboration. I'll put a little emphasis on that point that he mentioned as well. I mean, I think the market will speak in the next year, and that will be very helpful. I want to just put a pin, as people happen to have this slide up, on the little white spot to the end of the triangle of the green there. And just remember that little space for the next conversation we're going to have after this, because EVP Goldman won't have a map for that. And I want you to remember that sea of white there in the middle of all the purple for our next conversation. So that's all
Thank
I
you
have.
for that, President Cunningham. Yeah, good. And Regent Bergstrom.
Well, thanks again, Chair Wheeler. And President Cunningham, that's getting to my question. I know it's the next agenda item, but while we have Mr. Morris here, how do you all come to, so with the project that, the building 1 that you're talking about, as I understood it, is owned or controlled by the subsidiary entity?
Yes.
Of the foundation? How do you all decide in maybe it's the next agenda item, I'm getting ahead, but with the Station 19 property, how do you all manage who's acquiring what as part of this kind of collaboration or partnership? Because as I understand the next item, we're acquiring Station 19, but maybe
So how do we decide, it's a question, how do we decide what the foundation pursues and what the university pursues? Is that?
and how's that working with regards to these pieces in particular?
So I can speak to the next item, and I just want to make sure I'm not out of order here. Okay. Is that really that acquisition will have nothing to do with the mix. That is coming into university side, into our planning footprint. We look at Station 19. Now, there's a long-term lease still there. Buffalo Wild Wings will be there for 10 more years. But you think about what a lot of universities have that we don't have, something like an alumni house, something like a gathering place. The vision is, and we've tried to purchase this over many years before, is for whoever's in these chairs 10, 15 years from now, to have that to maybe an alumni house, maybe a park, maybe green space around the building. It is registered landmark, so the building will stay. So I think it's important to note this is separate of the mix and really part of the university's long-term planning around footprint and space.
President Morris, anything to add to that?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments? All right, terrific. Thank you so much for your time, President Morris. We hadn't had that agenda item, reviewed here at the Board of Regents for a number of years, so it's good to hear the update for certain, and we'll get the update a year from now at minimum. So thank you very much. All right, with that, we'll move on to our third item, which is to review and act on one previewed, real estate interaction on the Twin Cities campus. We'll take each of the transactions individually. And first, Executive Vice President Goldman will provide an introduction of both items. And then we'll turn to the Vice President for University Services, Alice Roberts-Davis, to outline each transaction. So turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Chair Wheeler and members of the board. The next two real estate actions reflect our ongoing efforts to align the university's strategic property portfolio with our long-term campus priorities. The first is the proposed sale of the Murphy Wellhouse property. The university acquired this site in 2015 with the possibility that it could support a future off-site library collections facility. As planning advanced, it became clear that the buildings were not suitable for that purpose and would require substantial capital investment to maintain. Over the past several years, we have pursued multiple efforts to sell this property, including 2 board-approved transactions that ultimately did not produce the sale due to market conditions or buyer financing challenges. Following a long pause to reassess our long-term needs and the financial implications of continued ownership, the administration informed the board in May of our intent to move forward with disposition. The proposed sale before you today will allow us to avoid significant future costs and focus resources on higher priority needs that better support the university's land grant mission. We're hopeful that this third attempt will bring this long-running effort to a successful conclusion. The second item that Vice President Roberts Davis will talk about is the purchase of Station 19. The property has long been recognized as strategically important to the university due to its location and proximity to surrounding university-owned parcels. Acquiring Station 19 has been part of our campus planning vision for many years and squarely in our planning area. Ownership will allow us to ensure cohesive, compatible land use in this area, keeping private student or other housing out of our planning area, and better position the university for future development opportunities that are consistent with our master plan. With that, I'll turn it over to Vice President Roberts Davis to walk you through each item. Alice.
Thank you, EVP Goldman. Good afternoon, Chair Wheeler and members. The first property proposed for sale today is 701 24th Avenue Southeast in Minneapolis, otherwise known as the Murphy Warehouse. It consists of 21.7 acres and 38 interconnected building sections totaling just over 706,000 square feet. These buildings were constructed between 1902 and 1977. The property was purchased from the Murphy Warehouse Company on December 21st, 2015 for $17.975 million. At the time of purchase, the university was considering using the property for a new library collections facility. During pre-design, it was determined that the existing warehouses were not suitable for that purpose. The structural capacity and the climate controls required for the storage of books have necessitated the construction of a new building in the Como area. This one was not amenable to that use. This was both cost prohibitive and not a wise investment at that time for that aging facility, and so we did come up with a different solution. As EVP Goldman noted, this is the third time that the board has been asked to review a potential sale of the property. The university does not take the sale of property lightly, and over the past 6 years, we have considered multiple uses and options for the potential use of this property. However, it requires significant capital reinvestment, and sale of the property will avoid immediate capital investment expenses as well as deferred maintenance and ongoing operating costs. The Murphy Warehouse Company lease will expire on December 31st of this year and will not be renewed. The lease was a major revenue source used to offset ongoing costs associated with the day-to-day operations of the facility. Without that revenue, the university will be forced to allocate scarce financial resources toward operating the facility. Since acquisition, the university adopted an updated campus plan in 2021. The property was identified for disposition as part of that update, and in addition to avoiding future capital and maintenance costs, sale of the property will free up the university's debt capacity for other capital and real estate needs that are better aligned with our campus priorities. Following the May 2025 notice to the board of the intent to dispose of the property, the university offered it for sale once again to the city, county, and state. No governmental agencies were interested in the property, and so we issued another RFP for disposition. No buyer was selected as part of the RFP process due to insufficient proposals received, but the current buyer did express an interest shortly thereafter. Per university administrative procedure, following a public offering in which no bidder proposal was accepted, real estate may be sold at a negotiated sale, provided that the offer is comparable to the best valued proposal rejected. The university and the buyer, Elm 24 Industrial LLC, executed a purchase and sale agreement on October 15th of this year, and that is subject to board review and approval. The buyer is currently in their due diligence review. The negotiated purchase price of $18 million is based on the vacancy of the facilities, the limited potential use of some of the older portions of the warehouse, and the need for significant capital reinvestment. Within 10 days of execution of the purchase and sale agreement, the buyer did deposit $180,000 of earnest money, which will be applied to the purchase price. Closing is scheduled for March 18th of next year, but is subject to the completion of the buyer's due diligence, which includes the issuance of a demolition permit for portions of the facility, some of which are considered an historic designated district. Elm 24 Industrial LLC intends to continue the use of the property for light to medium industrial development. The sale proceeds will be first used to pay the outstanding debt on the property, and then the remaining proceeds will be used to fund other strategic real estate and capital investments across the campuses. And with that, I'll pause here, Chair Wheeler, for any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Vice President Roberts-Davis. Before we turn to discussion, is there a motion to approve on behalf of the board the sale of 701 24th Avenue Southeast to the Murphy Warehouse? Second. Great. Any discussion? All right, all in favor with that? Say aye. Any opposed? Oh, that passes. Thank you very much. We'll walk through the second one then, please.
Thank you, Chair Wheeler and Regents. Our second real estate transaction is the acquisition of 2001 University Avenue Southeast, commonly known as Station 19. The property consists of a two-story commercial building constructed in 1893, containing 15,570 gross square feet and situated on nearly a half-acre parcel. Located within the Stadium Village neighborhood at the northwest corner of University Avenue Southeast and Oak Street Southeast, directly across from Huntington Bank Stadium, a portion of the property has been leased to Buffalo Wild Wings for many years, with office space on the upper level. The property is listed on the National Register of Historic Places and is zoned for community mixed use, which allows mid to high density mixed use development. The university owns the adjacent land surrounding the property, as you saw in the previous slides, and the site has long been identified as a strategically significant property due to its location, historic character, and relationship to existing university facilities. The university's interest in acquiring the property is to ensure that future planning, land use, and redevelopment in this area remain compatible with the university's long-term campus vision and operational needs. Ownership of the property will allow the university to thoughtfully integrate it into broader campus planning efforts, ensure cohesive land use, and support future opportunities. The purchase price for the property is $8 million, which is slightly above the appraised value, but reflects a competitive bidding process with multiple offers submitted and the strategic importance of the property to the university. The seller is Station 19 LLP and Station 19 Parking, Inc. The purchase price includes the building, as well as the seller's interest in the furniture, fixtures, and equipment associated with the second-floor office space, which was previously occupied by the seller. The purchase and sale agreement, which was executed in November of this year, contemplates a 45-day due diligence period during which $100,000 of earnest money would be paid, and grants the university the right to extend the period for an additional 30 days if we recognize any environmental conditions during our environmental investigation. We will also assume the Buffalo Wild Wings lease that expires in December of 2030, but also contains one remaining renewal option of 5 years through December of 2035. We plan to continue the lease with Buffalo Wild Wings for operation of a restaurant and will secure a strategic use for the second-story office space. The university will finance the purchase with debt, which will be paid off through a combination of rental income from the tenants of Station 19 and future real estate transactions. Per Board of Regents policy, our land acquisitions and dispositions are guided by 4 guiding principles that you see here. The disposition of Murphy Warehouse and the acquisition of Station 19 align with all 4 of those priorities in our policy. And with that, Madam Chair and Regents, that concludes my presentation.
Great, thank you again, Vice President Roberts-Davis. Before we have discussion again, is there a motion to approve on behalf of the board the acquisition of Station 19, 2001 University Avenue Southeast? Great, is there a second? Second. Terrific. Any further discussion or questions? Seeing, Regent Bergstrom, sorry about that.
I would just note, it's a bit of a mundane agenda item, but I've received notes from many members of the public about this who I happen to spend a lot of time with in that building when I was an undergrad, and they urged me to support it.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? With that, the motion is approved. Thank you very much.
you.
All right, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is a consent report. Executive Vice President Goldman, will you summarize what's in today's report, please?
Great. Thank you, Chair Wheeler, members of the board. The consent report before you today includes several items requiring board approval. These include amendments to the civil service rules, capital budget amendments associated with the university's new capital investment initiative, 2 employment agreements, the Morris Campus Plan, off-cycle tuition rate changes for specialized graduate programs, and approval for the proceeds to be used for long-term capital financing for designated capital projects. Of these, I'd like to highlight a couple. First, the capital budget amendments represent the first critical step in executing a long-term strategic commitment we made last year. These amendments launch the university's new capital investment initiative, which is the programmatic response to our pressing $6 billion of backlog of deferred maintenance. We're now operationalizing the multi-year funding strategy the board approved. This $150 million authorization, financed by university debt, is the initial drawdown against the recurring debt service allocation the board approved as part of the FY26 operating budget, demonstrating our discipline in funding critical infrastructure improvements. This effort directly advances the 5th imperative of our strategic roadmap, to secure our future as a world-class university through strategic investment in our facilities. The plan envisions a projected $750 million in capital investment over the next decade through subsequent 2-year financing increments. The initial $150 million will be strategically allocated across 3 areas. The detailed report outlining the project scope, cost estimates, and funding sources is provided in your materials. Next, I will note 2 senior leadership appointments recommended by President Cunningham. The first is the appointment of Erin Sexton as Vice President for Government Relations. Ms. Sexton brings nearly 30 years of experience in public affairs, legislative strategy, and stakeholder engagement, and will play a critical role in leading the university's government and community relations work. The second is the appointment of Dr. Michael Rodriguez as Chancellor of the University of Minnesota Morris Campus. Dr. Rodriguez is a longtime university leader, current dean, and Morris alum who brings deep knowledge of the system and a strong commitment to advancing the Morris Campus. Both agreements are included in your materials. The President recommends approval of the consent agenda. And with that, I turn it back to Chair Wheeler.
Great, thank you. Before I ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda, are there any comments, questions, or items that people want to pull off the consent agenda for future discussion? Hearing none, I will ask if there's a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
It has been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. Consent agenda, thank you. All right. Turn the page. Okay. Let's see. Turn the page again. All right, here we go. Informational items, there we are. And then Executive Vice President Goldman, anything on the informational items, please?
Thank you, Chair Wheeler and members of the board. I have 2 information items to share with the board this afternoon. First is a fiscal year 2025 annual financial report. This material provides the university's full financial statements for FY25, including the independent auditor's report, management's decision and analysis, and comparative results from FY24. You'll find a summary of the key trends in assets, liabilities, net positions, revenues, and expenses. The report is provided annually in accordance with board policy. The second item is an update to the Investment Advisory Committee. The meeting that took place in November is also included in your report, in your board book, and with that, those are my comments.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments about the informational items? All right. Seeing none, and to the delight of our Chair Hipsch, I'm going to see no further business before this body. Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
I would just like to note that Doug always